Picture this. You're a Roman senator in the year 40 AD, sitting in the most prestigious governing body in the world, when your emperor walks in leading a horse, not just any horse, Incitatus, draped in purple silk and wearing a jeweled collar, worth more than most citizens earn in a lifetime. The emperor announces that this horse is now your colleague, a consul of Rome with the power to pass laws and command legions. The man making this proclamation isn't a madman from the streets. He's Caligula, the most powerful person on earth. If you think modern politicians are crazy, wait until you hear what happened when absolute power met complete insanity in ancient Rome. Hit that like button and subscribe, because today we're diving into the most shocking transformation in imperial history. Let me know in the comments, what's the most outrageous abuse of power you've ever witnessed? This isn't just another story of Roman excess. It's a psychological horror story about how unlimited authority can transform a promising young leader into a monster who declared war on the ocean itself. The promising start 0:30 to 3 o'clock. To understand how Caligula became history's most infamous madman, we need to start with the beloved prince who captured Rome's heart long before he lost his mind. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus in 12 AD. He was the son of Germanicus, Rome's most popular general, and the heir everyone hoped would eventually rule the empire. As a small child, Gaius accompanied his father's legions on campaigns along the Germanic frontier, where soldiers dressed him in miniature military gear complete with tiny boots. The troops nicknamed him Caligula, meaning little boots, and the name stuck. This wasn't just cute military theater. Young Caligula was being groomed for greatness from birth. He was a direct descendant of Augustus, the first emperor, and his bloodline represented the very best of Roman nobility. Contemporary accounts describe him as intelligent, charismatic, and surprisingly mature for his age. Soldiers who had served with his father adored him, seeing in the boy the promise of continued military glory. When Germanicus died mysteriously in 19 AD, possibly poisoned by political rivals, Caligula became even more precious to the Roman people. He was the living symbol of their beloved general, the heir to a legacy of military conquest and popular leadership. His mother, Agrippina, the elder, made sure everyone remembered that her son carried the bloodline of heroes. Emperor Tiberius, Caligula's great uncle, initially kept the boy close to the imperial court. But Tiberius was a paranoid ruler who saw potential threats everywhere, and eventually even his own great-nephew became suspect. Caligula spent his teenage years walking a dangerous tightrope, knowing that one wrong word or suspicious action could mean exile or death. This early experience with political terror would prove crucial to understanding his later behavior. For years, Caligula lived in constant fear, watching as Tiberius systematically destroyed his family members through executions, forced suicides, and mysterious disappearances. His mother and brothers died in Tiberius's prisons, leaving Caligula as the sole survivor of a once powerful dynasty. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, some sources suggest Caligula may have hastened his death. The 24-year-old prince inherited an empire that was desperate for change. Tiberius had been a competent but deeply unpopular ruler, hoarding wealth while neglecting public entertainment and infrastructure. Rome was ready for someone young, energetic, and generous. Caligula's first months as emperor seemed to fulfill every hope the Roman people had harbored. He immediately released political prisoners, recalled exiles, and distributed generous bonuses to both citizens and soldiers. He organized spectacular games and gladiatorial contests that reminded everyone of the glory days under Augustus. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy being emperor, approaching the role with enthusiasm rather than the grim duty that had characterized Tiberius's reign. The mysterious illness, 3 o'clock to 5:30, 8 months into his reign. Just as Romans were beginning to believe they had found their ideal emperor, something went catastrophically wrong. In October, Caligula fell seriously ill with what ancient sources describe as a fever so severe that it brought him to the brink of death. For days, the emperor lay unconscious in his palace while the entire empire held its breath. Without clear air, Caligula's death would have plunged Rome into civil war. Citizens offered prayers at temples, soldiers maintained vigils, and even political enemies found themselves hoping for his recovery rather than facing the chaos his death would unleash. The exact nature of Caligula's illness remains one of history's great medical mysteries. Ancient historians offer various theories. Some suggest viral encephalitis, others point to temporal lobe epilepsy, and a few raise the possibility of poisoning by political rivals. Modern medical experts have proposed everything from hyperthyroidism to bipolar disorder as potential explanations. What we know for certain is that the illness fundamentally changed Caligula's brain. When he finally recovered after weeks of delirium, those closest to him immediately noticed disturbing changes in his personality. The charming, generous young emperor had been replaced by someone whose behavior ranged from merely eccentric to genuinely terrifying. The first signs were subtle but alarming. Caligula began experiencing severe insomnia, often wandering the palace corridors at night, talking to himself or having animated conversations with people who weren't there. Palace servants reported finding him standing motionless for hours, staring at nothing, before suddenly exploding into fits of manic energy. His relationship with reality became increasingly tenuous. He would claim to have conversations with the gods, particularly Jupiter, whom he believed spoke to him directly. These weren't metaphorical religious experiences. Caligula genuinely seemed to believe he was receiving divine communications that ordinary mortals couldn't hear. More disturbing were the changes in his emotional responses. The emperor, who had shown genuine affection for his subjects, now displayed sudden, unpredictable rages, followed by periods of inappropriate laughter or childlike behavior. He seemed to have lost the ability to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate responses to different situations. But perhaps most ominously, Caligula appeared to have developed an obsession with testing the limits of his imperial power. It was as if the illness had stripped away all internal restraints on his behavior, leaving him free to explore just how far absolute authority could be pushed. The descent into madness to 5:30 to 9 o'clock. What followed Caligula's recovery was a systematic exploration of just how insane an emperor could behave while still maintaining power. His descent wasn't gradual. It was a rapid plunge into megalomania that shocked even Romans, accustomed to imperial excess. One of his first acts of public madness was declaring war on Neptune, god of the sea. This wasn't metaphorical. Caligula literally ordered his legions to march to the English Channel and attack the waves. Soldiers were commanded to stab the water with their swords and collect seashells as spoils of war to be displayed in Rome, as evidence of their victory over the ocean. Imagine being a battle-hardened Roman legionnaire, veteran of real wars against Germanic tribes, being ordered to fight the tide. Yet such was the power of imperial authority that soldiers obeyed, wading into the surf to attack an enemy that couldn't be defeated, wounded, or even meaningfully engage. But Caligula's war against the sea was just the beginning. He began appearing in public dressed as various gods, demanding that citizens worship him as a living deity. This wasn't just ceremonial. He had temples built in his own honor and required sacrifices to be made to his divine image. His relationship with the Roman Senate became a theater of deliberate humiliation. During meetings, he would force elderly senators to run alongside his chariot for miles, or make them stand in the sun for hours while he conducted trivial business. He seemed to take genuine pleasure in reducing Rome's most dignified men to exhausted, sweating figures of ridicule. The emperor's sexual behavior became equally notorious and disturbing. He reportedly committed incest with all 3 of his sisters, treating these relationships not as scandals to be hidden, but as royal prerogatives to be flaunted. When his favorite sister Drusilla died, he declared her a goddess and made denial of her divinity a capital offense. Caligula's cruelty became legendary throughout the empire. He would force parents to watch their children's executions, then invite them to dinner the same evening, expecting them to appear cheerful and grateful for the honor. He kept detailed records of torture sessions, apparently reviewing them for entertainment during quiet moments. His relationship with his horse, Incitatus, represents perhaps the perfect symbol of his madness. The emperor didn't just love this animal. He treated it as a member of the imperial family. Incitatus lived in a marble stable, ate from an ivory manger, and wore purple blankets and jeweled collars. Caligula would invite the horse to dinner, setting a place at the table and conducting serious conversations with an animal that could only respond with snorts and whinnies. The announcement that Incitatus would be made consul wasn't just an insult to the Senate, it was a demonstration that Caligula viewed Roman governance as a joke not worth taking seriously. By elevating a horse to the highest administrative position in the empire, He was essentially declaring that Roman institutions had no meaning beyond his personal whims. The sexual depravity and violence to 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. Caligula's sexual behavior became so notorious that even Romans, hardly prudes when it came to imperial excess, were shocked by his depravity. His actions weren't just personally disturbing. They represented a complete abandonment of the social codes that held Roman society together. The emperor began treating the wives and daughters of prominent citizens as his personal property. He would publicly examine women at social gatherings, commenting on their physical attributes as if they were livestock at market. If he found someone attractive, he would simply announce that she was now his concubine, regardless of her marital status or personal wishes. His marriage to Lalia Paulina exemplifies his approach to relationships. Caligula saw her at her wedding to another man, decided he wanted her for himself, and immediately forced her to divorce her new husband and marry him instead. The marriage lasted only a few months before he divorced her and banished her from Rome, but not before seizing her enormous dowry for the imperial treasury. Even more disturbing were reports of his relationship with his sisters. Roman culture had strict rules about family relationships, but Caligula seemed to view imperial status as exemption from all moral constraints. He reportedly lived openly with his sister Drusilla, as if she were his wife, appeared with her at public functions, and included her in official ceremonies, typically reserved for emperors and their legitimate spouses. When Drusilla died suddenly, in 38 AD, Caligula's grief transcended normal mourning and entered the realm of madness. He declared a period of public mourning during which laughing, bathing, or dining with family was punishable by death. He had Drusilla declared a goddess, making her the first Roman woman to receive such honor, and built temples where citizens were required to worship her image. But perhaps most chilling were Caligula's innovations in public execution. He seemed to view torture and death as entertainment, developing increasingly elaborate methods of killing that combined cruelty with theatrical spectacle. He would force family members to watch each other die, then invite them to banquets where they were expected to act grateful for the emperor's attention. One particularly horrifying account describes Caligula ordering a father to watch his son's execution, then immediately inviting the man to dinner. When the grief-stricken father appeared somber during the meal, Caligula threatened to have him tortured as well, unless he showed proper appreciation for the imperial hospitality. The emperor's cruelty wasn't random violence, it was calculated. Psychological torture designed to demonstrate that no relationship, no social bond, and no human emotion was beyond his power to manipulate and destroy. The conspiracy forms 12 o'clock to 1430. By 41 AD, Caligula's reign of terror had created something unprecedented in Roman history. A conspiracy that included virtually everyone with access to the emperor: senators, praetorian guards, palace servants, and even imperial family members had united in their desperate desire to end the madness. The conspiracy was led by Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian Guard tribune, who had endured years of humiliation at Caligula's hands. The emperor seemed to take particular pleasure in mocking Sharia's masculinity, giving him passwords like Venus and Priapus that forced the tough military veteran to speak words associated with sexuality and effeminacy. But Sharia wasn't acting alone. The conspiracy included Marcus Vinicius, who had been married to Caligula's sister before the emperor forced their divorce. It included Cornelius Sabinus, another Praetorian officer who had watched the emperor destroy Roman military discipline through his bizarre behavior. Most significantly, it may have included members of Caligula's own family, who realized that their survival depended on his death. The plotters faced a unique challenge, killing an emperor who was unpredictable in his movements, surrounded by loyal guards, and paranoid enough to suspect betrayal from anyone. Caligula had survived at least one previous assassination attempt, and had become increasingly suspicious of those around him. Their opportunity came during the Palatine Games in January 41 AD. These multi-day celebrations provided the perfect cover for the conspiracy, as the emperor would be distracted by entertainment and surrounded by crowds that could mask the assassins' approach. The psychological pressure on the conspirators was enormous. They weren't just planning to kill a man. They were preparing to murder someone who claimed to be a living god, whose death might bring divine retribution. In a society where imperial authority was viewed as sacred, assassination wasn't just murder, it was sacrilege. But by this point, Caligula's behavior had become so extreme that even religious Romans were beginning to question whether he truly possessed divine authority or had simply gone mad with power. His claim to be Jupiter incarnate seemed less like imperial majesty and more like the delusions of a diseased mind. The final straw may have been Caligula's announcement that he planned to move the imperial capital to Alexandria, where he could be worshipped more appropriately as a living pharaoh god. This would have meant abandoning Rome entirely, treating the Eternal City as just another provincial town in his divine kingdom. The assassination, 1430 to 1630, on January 24th, 41 AD. The conspiracy reached its bloody conclusion in the underground corridors of the imperial palace. The assassination of Caligula was swift, violent, and carried out by men who had reached the absolute limit of their endurance. The emperor had been attending theatrical performances as part of the Palatine Games, but around noon he decided to return to his palace for lunch. This routine movement provided the conspirators with their opportunity, a narrow underground passage where Caligula would be separated from most of his guards. Cassius Chaerea struck first, approaching the emperor under the pretense of asking for the daily password. When Caligula gave him the password, ironically, it was Jupiter. Reflecting his divine delusions, Chaerea responded by driving his sword into the emperor's neck. But Chaerea wasn't taking any chances with just one wound. He was immediately joined by Cornelius, Sabinus, and other conspirators who surrounded the emperor and began stabbing him repeatedly. Ancient sources report that Caligula received over 30 wounds, ensuring that there was no possibility of survival. bias, or rescue. The emperor's final moments were described by witnesses as pathetic rather than heroic. The man who had claimed to be a god died begging for mercy, crying out that he was still alive, even as his lifeblood poured onto the palace floor. There was no divine intervention, no supernatural protection, just a mad tyrant meeting the same end as any mortal man. But the assassination was only the beginning of the conspirators' plan. They also killed Caligula's wife, Caesonia, and their infant daughter, Julia Drusilla, ensuring that no member of his immediate family could serve as a rallying point for loyalist forces. This wasn't just regicide, it was the complete elimination. Call Caligula's bloodline. The Praetorian Guard's reaction revealed the complex politics surrounding the assassination. While some guards had participated in the conspiracy, others remained loyal to the imperial system, if not to Caligula personally. Rather than celebrating the tyrant's death, they began searching for a new emperor to maintain their own power and position. They found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, hiding behind a curtain in the palace, apparently terrified that he would be killed along with his nephew. The guards declared Claudius emperor on the spot, creating a smooth transition that prevented the civil war many had feared would follow Caligula's death. The aftermath and lessons 1630 to 18 o'clock. The immediate aftermath of Caligula's assassination revealed both the relief and the trauma his reign had inflicted on the Roman Empire. When news of his death reached the people, there was no public mourning, no calls for vengeance against his killers. Instead, there was a collective sigh of relief that the nightmare was finally over. The Senate's first act was to attempt something unprecedented. They tried to restore the Roman Republic, abolishing the imperial system entirely. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that Caligula's madness might lead to a return to the old forms of government that had made Rome great. But this dream died quickly when the Praetorian Guard made it clear they would not tolerate the end power of imperial rule. They had too much invested in the system to allow its abolition, and they possessed the military force to impose their will. Claudius became emperor not through senatorial appointment, but through military coup. The new emperor's first challenge was dealing with the psychological aftermath of Caligula's reign. An entire generation of Romans had lived through 4 years of systematic terror, watching their emperor commit acts that violated every standard of human decency and political wisdom. Claudius wisely chose to portray his predecessor as a victim, bias, of madness rather than evil, suggesting that the illness had destroyed Caligula's mind and made him incapable of rational decision-making. This interpretation allowed Romans to separate the beloved young prince from the monster he had become, making it easier to move forward without the trauma of believing they had been ruled by someone inherently evil. But the deeper lessons of Caligula's reign couldn't be so easily dismissed. His transformation from promising leader to murderous tyrant demonstrated the fundamental weakness of autocratic government, when absolute power is concentrated in a single person. The system becomes completely dependent on that individual's mental health and moral character. Caligula's story also revealed How quickly civilized society can descend into barbarism when institutional constraints are removed. The Roman Empire had sophisticated laws, ancient traditions, and complex bureaucracies. But none of these safeguards could prevent a mad emperor from turning the state into an instrument of personal cruelty and megalomania. Perhaps most disturbing was how many people had been willing to participate in or enable Caligula's madness. Senators who should have resisted his demands instead competed to flatter him. Citizens who should have protested his excesses instead cheered his spectacles. The system that should have constrained his power instead amplified it. Conclusion. 18 o'clock to 19 o'clock. The story of Caligula's transformation from beloved prince to murderous madman remains one of history's most chilling examples of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely. In just 4 years, he went from being Rome's greatest hope to its most dangerous threat, leaving behind a trail of psychological trauma that took generations to heal. His reign teaches us that political systems must be designed to function even when led by the mentally ill, the morally corrupt, or the simply incompetent. No government should depend entirely on the character of its leaders, because human nature is too unpredictable and fragile to serve as the sole foundation for political authority. The emperor who tried to make his horse a consul, who declared war on the sea, and who demanded worship as a living god wasn't just a historical curiosity. He was a warning about what happens when power becomes completely divorced from responsibility, accountability, and basic human decency. Caligula's madness destroyed lives, traumatized an empire, and nearly brought down the greatest civilization of the ancient world. But it also demonstrated the resilience of human institutions and the eventual triumph of sanity over insanity, even in the darkest of times. What do you think drives people to such extremes when given unlimited power? Have you ever seen someone change completely when they gained authority over others? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into one of history's most shocking transformations, make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories from the ancient world. Next week, we'll explore another Roman monster, the emperor who built a floating bridge just to ride his horse across the Bay of Naples to prove a point to his critics. You won't want to miss it.